持人，我叫陈奕麟，我在那个交大社会所。那因为我已经本来坐在前面这一排，所以我不必动了。我们这个第二位林教授不见了。
他准备回来了。
那会手册里面都有介绍过这一场的那个主题内容跟那个主讲者简介，所以我想我不必重复，不必多说了。而且林志杰老师已经简单自我介绍了。那第一位我只是简单介绍第一位的那个主讲者是那个Prof John ERNI 他是那个香港那个 Baptist U 的一个讲座教授。其实我今天早上才发现，他的中文名字叫做陈锦荣。因为我认识他很多年，所以一直叫 ERNI。那虽然我是 CHUN CHUN， 他是 ERNI。但是我刚发现我们是同姓兄弟，我很高兴，今天这一场的那个主题太重要了 ，OK， 是牵涉到这个反送中的这个法律或事件。我们都知道，如果没有发生过这个事情的话，我们就没有今天这个会议这个说实在应该是会议里面的最重要的一场因为第一场里面已经有人问过有关这个法律问题所以是非常关键，而且今天接下去还有几场会继续谈这个法律问题但是我后来想一想，我们第一场先谈这个社会运动，其实是正确的，它是一个很重要的切入点。因为我觉得这个法律问题虽然是很重要，但是我们不要忘掉，它发生在什么样的 context 里面。其实香港我们要了解香港已经在有一个变动 ，OK， 这个背后的这个社会脉络也是很重要。如果这个社会脉络不是这样的不稳定的话，很可能不会这个事情不会爆发的那么严重。所以我那个不多说了，我们就先就请这个Professor ERNI 先那个讲讲。
How do you make it? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see it. Okay, good. Yeah, because it looks different. OK， 大家好，非常谢谢刘老师请我过来。我香港浸会大学陈锦荣。我这个姓陈的东西我很少用，所以你在街头你叫陈锦荣，我不会理你这样子。I can speak a little bit of Mandarin. I can fool people when I do more conversational Mandarin. But in this context, I must say, I apologize that I'm going to use English to present my ideas because this is the better way for me to capture my thinking, if that's okay. Yeah. Okay. I wrote this title for this talk on the understanding that everybody, I think, who sits in this room would instantly recognize. In other words, everybody should in some ways recognize that the law is lawless. If you've ever had any personal encounter with the law, I mean, I don't want to ask you to raise your hands how many times you've broken the law. It's up to you. But any kind of even casual contact with the law, with any kind of boundaries, norms, rules, prescriptions of behavior and conduct, you might intuitively understand that there's something a little bit wrong with the law. All right. I want to start in this kind of a space in which some mundane, even fairly banal experience of the law can lead us to maybe think differently about the law. I will, of course, get into a little bit more formal discussion about the inside story about how the law becomes law, okay, in a moment. I have a law background, even though I've been teaching and writing and researching in the area of cultural studies for many years. But one year, I went crazy. I suddenly thought, if I were to continue to write about social justice issues at the community level, at the identity politics level, whatnot, I got to understand something about the law. I came to that crossroads. This was in 2005, so this is quite some time ago. I had this very strong realization that, especially for those of us who are critical thinkers, not to avoid the law, not to bypass it in our own thinking about what is going on. Right? And so I finally finished my book on law and cultural studies, which was published earlier this year. And so I must say, for many years, I think about the little or the big problems with the law and why we continue to live with it. This is another mundane realization. I'll finish this introduction very quickly. Other than realizing that there's always something a little bit off, a little bit weird, a little bit unfair about the law, right? Other than that mundane realization, there's that other mundane realization, which is that despite that intuition, despite our experience with the law in this way, there's no way you can avoid it. You have to live inside the law, in the type of society where we live anyway. Okay. So I want to speak from that kind of a space to help us think about what is going on in the movement today in Hong Kong. I am 100% with Li Ju when she said earlier, it's not about the economy. But I want to put it a bit more accurately in my language, that is to say, it is not about the economy either. It is that very ambiguous relation through which all the political mess, all the legacy of police control and governance problems in Hong Kong somehow get collapsed into the economy. Right? There are reasons why. Right? For those of us who grew up in Hong Kong, we understand that in the type of society where we live, Hong Kong is not so much a society. Hong Kong is mainly an economy. To this extent, the economic language of governance is the most legible language in our town. So even little kids could understand that language, right, of capitalist transaction, of how to live in a capitalist economic mode of life. No wonder the government, whenever it gets into any kind of crisis, will take out this very familiar, most legible type of normal language with which to speak to the people, and then use that as a way to get away from their own incompetence, which is exactly what our finance minister, our chief executive, everybody in the upper echelon of the government are now doing at the moment, to blame the movement as the problem of causing further economic deterioration in Hong Kong. Right? And that gets to people. Right? That gets people worried. That gets people to think about why we cannot continue with the so-called violence and the protests. While I agree with that, once we clear that the real story of the crisis isn't economic, but economic is often the kind of escape valve, if you will, for any kind of governance problem. To me, the core of the problem is the law. Now, maybe because I study the law, and I think this way, I think to essentialize the problem a bit, because I focus a lot on what has been going on with our ordinances, what has been going on with our legal reform efforts in Hong Kong, and how even the police ordinance, public order ordinance, has been utilized in the last few months. That's why I think in this way. So I'm going to present to you a little bit of kind of idea here to share with you. Maybe take questions from you about the fact that I think the crux of the political movement that has gotten us into this level of trouble is that for the longest time, Hong Kong has been known as one of the most lawful societies, and that gave the governments from the colonial times to now the excuse to not make real legal reform. With the lack of real legal reform, we get into this particular mess. Let me start with some questions, because some of my friends, both in Hong Kong and overseas, understand that these are the things I've been thinking about. So they asked me some very practical questions. I ended up summarizing with a list of main questions that people have asked me about the law. Many friends ask me, if you are injured in a protest and suffer from violence, even indiscriminate violence. Of course, everybody's thinking about July 21st and August 21st as prime examples of people suffering from indiscriminate violence. What is their legal recourse if you are the injured person? Can ordinary citizens sue the police and not just to lodge a complaint? I hope you know the answer to this, even those of you who live in Taiwan. Can you sue the police? Of course you can. Right? Anybody can sue anybody. Another question now that comes with this. If it is possible for the injured citizen to sue the police, the process would necessarily involve the police to help gather and examine the evidence. Now, of course, this scenario creates an internal authority loop. So how do you get beyond this perceived trap? There's a very practical legal question, isn't it? I've also received friends who ask more recently, what laws allow the police to handcuff and push away the medics, the social workers, and even journalists from the protest site? This question came very urgently, especially after on November 18 at Polytechnic University, when the police took exactly that type of action. They handcuffed and took away these people who were supposed to be helping. They're not there as protesters. And then, around the same time, November 18 and 19, due to the big fight at Polytechnic University, there were questions about what valid legal standards there are for mass arrests. How does the law think about mass arrests instead of individual arrests? We've been seeing a lot of individual arrests. So now the police have moved on, apparently, to making mass arrests. What are the legal standards governing that? And much earlier, of course, in the movement, I get questions about whether the UN can get involved, or whether the International Criminal Court can get involved, whether the American Congress can get involved. Now, we kind of sorted some of that out by now, right? Now, these are some of the practical questions that I received. And from these questions, I think about some of the more conceptual questions about the law that are relevant today. So there are 2 or 3. So let me just tell you what they are. At least these are the questions I think about all the time. How does the law both enable and protect the act of protest and so violently suppress protest at the same time? In a society that prides itself as lawful, like Hong Kong. Now, the pride that we are one of the safest cities in the world, blah, 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 right? That has been a colonial legacy, really, that we inherited from the British government. In this type of society in which we feel proud about the law, why does the maintenance of law and order appear to be so unlawful, especially with respect to the perceived problem of excessive use of force, perceived deviation from due process, and perceived differentiation of who to arrest and who seems to let loose. Right? One of the things that get many Hong Kong people very, very angry about July 21st is how come the police selectively arrest people and selectively let people off the hook, as it were. More fundamentally, and I think I'm going to address this more directly towards the end of my talk, is the law to be unconditionally obeyed, regardless of context, procedures, and interpretation of law? In other words, is the law equal to justice and morality? Now, for those of you who have law background, or even studied any type of law-related subject, you would know that these are very fundamental but grave questions. What I want to tell you is that even these mundane, fundamental questions are now significantly being renewed in Hong Kong. I see ourselves moving forward in this movement, in this struggle, by opening up, or having already opened up, many renewed energy, renewed interest in these very fundamental questions about law, about duties, about rights, about human rights. So, two main parts here in terms of my sharing with you this afternoon. This morning. I hope it's what I should point here. No? Don't worry, I'll do this. Okay, this is what I just told you. So, two parts. I want to do a part of what I call a normative understanding of the law that's relevant to our thinking about the movement today. And then the second part is the less normative view of the law. Now, from the most normative understanding of the law, we can start by thinking in these terms. Right? What are the terms? If you look at these two statements, clearly the law is relational. There wouldn't be any kind of functioning significance of any law if it doesn't already set up some kind of relation. Obviously, a hierarchical relationship. Obviously, these are relations of power. For example, relation between the ruler and the ruled, right? Setting up common values in a society and finding balance in competing values. These are about different elements jostling for power, for significance. Very fundamental, but simplistic. But I think that is kind of the entry point to any understanding of the normative law. Another very normative understanding of the law that took us, at least in modern times, over 70 years to formulate. I'm referring to 1948, of course, when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was made, that over the last 70 years, we finally understood a very normative view of human rights, what we can claim to be our rights as humans, as communities, as identity groups. Right? What are the realizations? I think there are four main ones. These are the ones, right? That any type of understanding of human rights have to start with drafting, rethinking, writing, visualizing the narratives of trauma. That is the bottom line. If the world has been peaceful, if the world has been just, if the world has been fair, we wouldn't need human rights, do we? Secondly, we of course need to bring in moral philosophy. Earlier types of moral philosophy that governed the French Revolution and then the American Revolution, a much earlier rendition of human rights doctrines, right? They brought in more religious type of morality, right, into the picture. You can trace it even further back into history. Now, of course, over time, right, moral philosophy gave way to more secular type of moral thinking. The third point is absolutely crucial in our formulation of what we understand to be human rights. If there's no government, if any government isn't willing to do reform, if the government isn't willing to be responsive to its own people, there's no human rights to speak about in that society. It's absolutely crucial, right, that We have governments, whether you're in democratic or non-democratic situations, to be able to respond to changes, to demands from the people that constitute the important kind of structure or infrastructure for human rights. And of course, finally, and third is linked to the fourth, isn't it? The fourth point, to make the government responsive to demands, right? One of the government's tools at their disposal are the laws. Right? So if the Hong Kong government today is willing to change some of its laws, which of course it doesn't, then some of our problems will be solved, including the police public order ordinance, including the emergency law ordinance, etc., etc. But of course, these are things that are the contrary to this type of basic human rights understanding. It seems to us that the Hong Kong government is doing the exact opposite. Right? Very stubborn about changing any of its laws to accommodate the demands. Let me reiterate to you, this is very basic DNA of human rights. Again, nothing radical, nothing very critical, which explains why human rights thinking, especially from the perspective of the movement and from the perspective of activists, appears to be very soft, appears to be quite weak. The perceived weakness of human rights to change any type of political crisis, I think, stems from some of these very normative understanding and concepts of human rights. So it is a decision, in some ways, that Hong Kong people will need to make as to whether this is the time to renew our focus on human rights or to just let it go. Just let it die. And then come up with another kind of moral project. Right? Any kind of credible moral project to help us get into the future. But I think this is itself a very difficult choice to make. And inside this, of course, is the question of the law. Once again, the law is quite central. So let me get to this part which I've emphasized from the very beginning, that the lawlessness of law is itself very mundane. That's a normative way of understanding the law. However, if you take these statements seriously, which I do, they look weird, but law has no inherent legality. Instead, for it to be legal, it must first be legalized. The tautology in this way of thinking, I think, is important because if you take that seriously, you will begin to see that what we call the law is about a number of other things that support it. Firstly, it's about institutions. It's about the establishment of valid, workable, functional, you don't need to be progressive, kind of institutions to support the law, right? To support the legalization of law. The second thing that supports it, of course, is the notion that the law isn't the law is just a bunch of processes. Now, of course, the law does get written into black letter law, in the doctrines, if you will, right? You can find that, you can download that. But anybody who works with the law will tell you, this is the least significant part of how the law works, is what is written on black and white. The more important, significant aspect of how the law works is in the process itself. So the processual dimension of the law constitutes this kind of idea that the law, 10 more minutes, I'm only beginning, right? I should rush. I guess what we're seeing is that the type of law that is now being used to suppress dissent and protest in Hong Kong didn't go through the due process of the law, so that the law fluctuates between being lawless and being lawful. I don't know if this makes any sense to you. The law that is now being utilized by this particular government to suppress dissent, the reason why we feel so uncomfortable about it is I think it is in this fluctuating dynamic between it being lawless and being lawful. We just don't know when it is rich in some ways. Right? So if you follow, this is just law school stuff, maybe I can skip. Law school stuff is famous for being boring. Okay? Famous. But this is an important chart. If the thing is, in legal training, we know that for the law to function, for the government anyway, or authority, these are three major dimensions of consideration. So as you can see, does the law clearly spell out this obligation, let's say to social justice? Is the law written precisely? And whether the state or the government is delegating or not, the degree to which it is delegating the function of the law to other bodies, other sectors of the society. And if I separate it out to high, medium, and low, like high obligation or high precision or high delegation, I'm afraid what we're seeing today in the use of, or the misuse of the law by the Hong Kong government today is that the law is at a high obligation. The obligation of the law is high, but the precision of the use of the law is very low. And the delegation of the law to society is also very low. Almost no dispersal of power. Right? You see in that third column, this is a legal term, of course, a large margin of appreciation given to the police to do its work, the 4 p.m. conference, right? Is to give the largest margin of appreciation is just giving you the leeway to make yourself justifiable. That's the largest margin of appreciation, so not very precise laws to begin with. So if I use this table, I think maybe I can try to shed light on this slightly clearer picture about the state of the law in Hong Kong today. What else do I have? Another way in which Benny Tai puts it. Some of you may remember Benny Tai, one of the key architects for the Occupy movement in 2014, right? The law professor in Hong Kong who studies constitutional law. He puts it in this way: what he calls beginning stage governance or high-level high-level governance. Beginning stage is when you obey the law blindly, right? Even though it lacks precision, all the rest of it, right? High level of governance is when there's more check and balance. And this language, if you're in the law school, this is completely acceptable, but if you're on the streets, this is really boring. Because this is also very normative, right? I don't have time to get into it. Very quickly about this, another very normative understanding of the law is what has been debated for many, many years, what is called the separation thesis. Put quickly, does the law have to be moral? Or are these two things separated? Right? For the legal positivists, it's quite well established that as long as the law itself is finely crafted, they use the best logical thinking to go into it, then the law is valid. Who cares about morality? That is known as the separation thesis. That's also some very basic thing you learn in law school. Right? Now, if you're learning about legal positivism, however, there is always a minority of law professors and a minority in the law programs, especially in international law or human rights law, that you would come across subjects for legal realism. The legal realist is different. They tend to be the more troublemakers in the law school, right? Students who are into legal realist thinking. Why? Because they believe in the indeterminacy of the law. They believe that any law needs to have the inherent contextuality and interpretation of the law. And of course, you need to bring in various types of interdisciplinary knowledge and authority to understand how the law works. From that, the legal realism from the 1960s onward, I want to say, so how many years now? That's about 6 years or so, have developed these very strong sub-disciplines within law school. Right? The law and society movement, the critical legal studies movement is one of the most visible kind, right? Law and literature movement, and I think there's an emerging understanding that there's a cultural studies of law movement going on that sort of breaks the hegemony of the law and tells these old-fashioned law professors there are alternative ways of thinking about the law. One way in which I want to demonstrate the power of using legal realism, and I might close with this example. It's just an example. Right? This is one of the most interesting. I teach this doctrine all the time to law students, and they love this because the language. If you never read this, I should give you a minute to read this.